How you doing? Martine here, and I want to jump right into the first book that I want to talk about, and it's The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. I'm using Brian Johnson's Philosopher's Notes. I got a lot of highlights here, and I want to highlight some of the really important parts. If you don't know who Brian Johnson is, he's a modern day philosopher. He's one of my mentors. I've been following him for probably 10, 12 years. And I'll have a link to his information and what he does in the notes here as well. But the first thing I want to do is talk about The Four Agreements, and it's a book by Don Miguel Ruiz. I've read the book probably 5 or 6 times. I would say at least 5 or 6 times. I've listened to the audiobook, probably no less than 30 or 40 times. And it is absolutely one of my favorite books. And when it comes to coaching, it's one of the first things I want to talk to people about and get them to work on the Four Agreements, because I think the Four Agreements are the basis to everything we do in life. So I want to read just a couple things and then we'll talk about them. Okay, cool. So the first thing, there's a quote from Don Miguel Ruiz. I'm going to break it up a little bit. It says, "If you can live your life with these agreements, you will see the drama of hell disappear right before your very eyes. Instead of living a life of hell, you will be creating a new dream, your personal dream of heaven." I love that. So what are the Four Agreements? The Four Agreements are, the first agreement is be impeccable with your word. The second one is don't take anything personal. It's pretty good, huh? The third one is don't make assumptions. And the fourth one is always do your best. So in the beginning of the book, he talks about the domestication of humans. And you really got to talk about that before you can really get into the agreements, because how we got out of these agreements, how we've ended up where we are as humans, as men and women, is because we've gotten away from who we really are, which is really great people, which is just amazing people, and we've been domesticated. So he says, the children are domesticated the same way that we domesticate a dog or a cat or any other animal. In order to teach a dog, we punish the dog and we give the dog rewards. We train our children, whom we love so much, exactly the same way that we would train an animal. We give them rewards when they're good, right? And then we give them punishment when they're not doing what we want. So it's kind of like you do a good deed, you're a good boy, you're a good girl. You do something that I don't like, you're a bad girl, you're a bad boy. And that's how we domesticate. That's how we train our children to follow us. At least that's what we try to do. I know that that's what happened with me. I know that that's what I did until I read the book, until I kind of started to watch this, and then I started to change the way that I would parent. And so that's what he says. I love that whole domestication thing. So, give an example of another way to look at domestication is, so we are born and then our families will domesticate us first. We go into school, we get domesticated there. We go into sports and we're trained there, domesticated, right? And then we go to college and there's a whole other form of domestication. We become social in different groups and there's rules. So kind of domestication, another way to look at it is like, what are the rules in which you're supposed to be living? So now you, in order to stay part of society, part of the group, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, in that whole love and belonging area, in order for you to be loved and to belong, you've got to follow the rules, because if you're not following the rules, guess what? You're going to get kicked out of the club. There was and it happens, I when I was 18 years old, there was a whole group of friends that I hung out with, and there were 2 of them that were getting married. Yeah, they got married really young and they're still married. They're very, very successful marriage. But there was a lot of people in the group talking about them being together. And I would get phone calls all the time, and, we would gossip. That's something I suggest you don't do, is gossip. So we would talk and stuff. And then I got in trouble for being the person that gossiped, so I got a big mouth, of course. So I was the one that got in trouble. And when they got married, all the other people that I've talked to on the phone went to the wedding, but I wasn't invited. So, I got punished by that group for not following the rules, and the rules are not to gossip, even though everybody gossips. So these rules of domestication that we have in society are rules, but they're not necessarily followed by everybody. and they're moved around quite a bit. We'll see that in politics, how that's moved around, right? So let's jump right into, actually, I want to talk to you another quote really quick. So Nietzsche tells us that society tames a wolf into a dog, and man is the most domesticated animal of all. It's pretty interesting, huh? And he tells us, who's this? Carlos Castaneda, who also is a Toltec writer. He wrote a book called, again, wrote so many books, but he wrote one called The Wheel of Time. And great book. I highly suggest you look at it. And he tells us that the purpose of the warrior, and the warrior is kind of like the thing to transcend to, like, what do you want to be in that whole Toltec tradition? And Toltec is like Mexico. It's like the Aztecs, that whole area down there, right? That whole culture down there. So the Toltec transition is, the purpose of the warrior is to transcend social conditioning as we discover our personal power and learn to live with clear intent and impeccability. So it's about like being the greatest version of yourself. Like that's the modern way of saying that. And you guys know, like I talk about a lot of ancient wisdom and then bring it into kind of the modern science area. So that's how that is. So let's jump straight into the first agreement. The first agreement is be impeccable with your word. And I want to read what Don Miguel Ruiz says that. He says that the first agreement is the most important one and also the most difficult one to honor. It's so important that with just the first agreement, you'll be able to transcend the level of existence that he calls heaven on earth. So just with being impeccable with your word, you will transcend living in hell and be able to enjoy earth, your life here on earth, as though it was heaven. It's impeccable. So let's jump into like what that means. So impeccable has a meaning, and the meaning of impeccable, as far as like the etymology of the word impeccable is, it means without sin. So without sin. So I do not have sin, but it's not talking about sin in the religious area, like where it's good, bad and evil and stuff. Sin was taken from archery back in the day, not our day, but back in the archery days when people were, fighting wars with bows and arrows. And so what they said is that if you miss the mark, so if you have a bullseye and you miss the bullseye, that is called sin. You sin. So I missed the mark, and that's a sin. So when you look at sin, when you look at missing the mark, when you look at being impeccable with your word, we want to take it out from being judgmental. We don't want to judge, blame, and complain. We talk about that in Men's Breakthrough. We talk about that in the Curiosity Theory. We want to take our life out of judgment, blame, and complaint, because I call those the three horsemen. So that takes us down what we call the regressive cycle and moves us into a reptilian mode. But when we're in the idea of being impeccable, first is to be impeccable with yourself, is to be without sin onto yourself. And it's like if I miss the mark, I don't want to sit around and call myself like a complete asshole or a jerk or something like that. Like, where's the power in that, right? So now I'm giving more words. Say when you're impeccable with your words, right? You create your world with your words. So I'm calling myself a jerk. I'm calling myself an a-hole or something like that. So now what I'm doing is I'm now creating a new or perpetuating an old version of myself, an old way that I looked at myself. That's not what we want to do. What we want to do is we want to create new ways of looking at ourselves and undomesticate ourselves. And so if you were told that you were a jerk, if you were told that you were a bad kid, and then you repeat those things when you make mistakes, when you fall short, right? When you sin, if you will, when you're not impeccable with your word, then what you're going to do is you're continuing the branding and the commands that you've given yourself or other people have given you in your life, and then you will continue to make those mistakes. So what happens is that you will find yourself and put yourself in situations in life to make more mistakes. You will put yourself in relationships where you're going to be treated the same way that you were when you were younger. And what happens a lot of times is we find that people will put themselves in relationships because they're trying to fix their issues that they had with their parents or with somebody they went to school with, or, they were hurt. So they put themselves in relationships so that they can realign themselves. But yet, because they don't understand the whole situation with being impeccable with your word, honoring yourself, making sure you don't sin against yourself first. When you do that, you're relating to it as like, oh, I just missed the mark. There's there's a thing that Brian Johnson says. He says needs work, so I missed the mark. Apparently I needs work. Like if I'm shooting an arrow at a target, I missed the target, then I'm like, needs work. I got to figure out like where I'm missing, right? I don't go, oh God, what a terrible human being I am. Nobody loves me, but that's what we do. And that's just playing something over and over in your head. So I don't want to kill that one. So that's the first agreement. Be impeccable with your word. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments if you can. The second agreement is don't take anything personally. So the idea of that is, and that's a really, really hard one because so many of us we listen to people, and then we trust people. We grow up with certain people, and then what they say has domesticated us. So what they say we take as the truth. And so when we're listening to people and they're saying, hey, and they're saying things to us, and it's maybe hurtful things, we take those things personally versus like, hey, that's their opinion. That's what they're going through. And I don't have to reflect that, or I don't have to put that on myself. What's the word that I use? Project that. I don't have to project what they have onto me. And that's a huge thing that we do. So when we're talking about, don't take anything personal, in the modern sense, it's like, don't take a projection from somebody else where they're saying something to you that's not a kind thing, that's not a forward moving thing, and then use it to hurt yourself. And so many of us do that. We use other people's words and other people's actions to hurt ourselves. I work with a lot of men that are going through divorce or men that have been through divorce. And one of the things that I find is that there's a point where when they want to get the relationship back, they become very, very sensitive and very empathetic to what their wives or their partners, could be, in a gay marriage, it's all the same, right? What their partner is doing. So where they used to not listen and they used to not watch the partner, now they're watching the partner. They're becoming empathetic to the partner. But what they have not learned to do often, or what they're not really good at doing, is taking that reaction that the person's having, or that's disappointed, or maybe they're upset, and they take that and they project it onto themselves, and then they have a physical or emotional experience of themselves now based on something external. So learning how to not take things personal is really, really powerful. We teach that in Men's Breakthrough. We do a whole part that. So if you haven't done Men's Breakthrough, please register for Men's Breakthrough. You'll have a breakthrough in actually all these agreements. So that's that. So don't take anything personal. I'm trying to think what else. There's a whole bunch of things. There's nothing that other people, one of the things that Don Miguel Ruiz says is nothing that other people do or say is because of you. Nothing that other people do or say is because of you. Think about that. Like when you're communicating with somebody else, when you have something to say about somebody, let's just say you have something to say about this hat, that's a stupid hat or something, right? Who's the person saying it's a stupid hat? It's you. So you're the person going, God, it's a stupid hat, or, I don't like his goatee or something. That is over there, and the idea is that what you would have to say about me has nothing to do with me. It's just everything to do with you and how you are projecting, how you are seeing the world. So when you're impeccable with your word, you're also impeccable with what you create and what you create in other people. So when you're taking stuff personal, it's because you are not impeccable with your word and not impeccable with what comes in, and you're using that to hurt yourself. So enough said about that. So the third agreement is don't make assumptions, right? So, there's a thing, there's assume, you make an ass out of you and me, and so the idea of not making assumption is a very, very healthy way of approaching what people say, because the problem with making assumptions is that we believe that what we think is true. We believe that what we think is true. And if you're, like me, I'm pretty well read. I mean, I read probably anywhere from 50 to 60 books a year. And so I'm what they call pretty well read, right? So I'm like what they call a smart rat. I use that term. Like if I think I know something, I'm kind of like a smart rat. I think like I know where the cheese is. I know how to get into the house, but all of a sudden there's a trap, bam, and I'm dead, right? And that's the thing is when we make assumptions, what we're doing is we're setting ourselves up for a trap. In the curiosity theory, men's breakthrough, we talk about a neutral way of looking at things, a positive and a negative. So the positive way of looking at things, and that's people say, oh, well, I want to be positive. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being positive, but when it comes to the context of curiosity, we want to take positive as how I'm going to influence myself. So if I'm making an assumption and I'm making a positive assumption, what I'm doing is I'm projecting positivity. So I'm using the information that I get outside, the external information, as well as what I'm thinking internally to kind of conclude that this is a positive thing, right? That's what I'm doing. And that's a cool thing to do. However, it could get you into trouble because if what you're doing is you're assuming something or you're creating a positivity where it's really not positive, it's something negative. And so you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And then the negative thing, and I'll tie that into politics in a second. The negative part of that is if what you're doing is you're creating a negative assumption, right? Because a positive, negative, and neutral. If you're creating a negative story, if you're creating a negative narrative about something, then what you're going to do is you're going to gather all the information to make you right so that you are right about that thing being negative. What we talk about in men's breakthrough, what we talk about in the curiosity theory is to approach things with a curious mindset, to be curious, right? And then it opens up ideas, right? So you're curious, you have a curious mindset, so you look at it neutrally. When you look at something neutrally, you're not charging it positive, you're not charging it negative, you're stepping back and looking at it and then making a decision, understanding that you're going to tie your decision in with your values and your virtues, right? And the qualities that you want in all your stories. So when you can learn to separate your stories from the facts, right? And know the influence that you have on your own assumptions, then it gives you the ability to be more neutral. And then what we see is when we talk about this whole domestication thing and you're being impeccable, right? That you're looking at something from a very kind of like a white wall, like this white wall. You're just looking at it from a white wall and saying, hey, this is let me actually be curious and figure out what this thing is, rather than decide that like it's this or that, right? I'm gonna say that this is the way that something is, and I'm going to, in politics, like in United States politics, we keep saying that we're polarized. I don't think that we're so polarized. Actually, I have a whole take on that. I think we're just like a family. Every family has people that argue and all this stuff and have different opinions, right? So, and that fight and that can't stand each other and that say really bad things to each other. That's kind of what it is in the world often to be a family. So in politics, let's say you're a Republican, right? Let's say you're a conservative and you watch Fox. Then when you watch in CNN, you're going, everything there's wrong, they're idiots, they're blah, So if you're a MAGA person, if you're a Trump supporter, then what you're going to do is you're going to find all the reasons to make what Trump does correct. And you're going to make everything that Biden does or the other side wrong. So are you really being neutral? Are you really being open? So you're living from an assumption, and that is being domesticated. So the society has now domesticated you into one way of being. And it's the same thing if you're a liberal. So let's say you're a liberal and then everything that Trump does, that's horrible. The guy's a terrible human being. He's all this stuff, right? So it's like, it's the same thing. So everything that you're creating, all your assumptions, your reality, right? Your reality is all based on your assuming something. And I'm not saying you're right or wrong with it. That's not the point I'm saying. I'm not saying that you're right or wrong. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm suggesting is when you're curious, right? When you're being curious, then you can actually look at it differently. You look at it differently. And what happens is when you're curious, you actually can absorb information better because you're listening to the information without a filter. And then when it comes in, you can kind of look at it. You're like, oh, okay, let me read these words. And then I can sort these words out based on what I think they could be, as well as what I assume they mean. And it gives you multiple perspectives at the same time, so it gives you power. So that's the third agreement. Don't make assumptions. Keep asking questions and stay curious. That's on that third agreement. The fourth agreement is always do your best. That's a good one, right? So always do your best. And this allows all the other three to become deeply ingrained. So when you're being impeccable with your word, right? When you're like, okay, I'm being really impeccable with my word. I'm not taking things personal, and I'm not making assumptions. That shifts your life. That shifts everything in your life. So that's the power. That is really the power of it all. So always doing your best. And there's a whole bunch of stuff we can talk about doing your best, but you have whatever your version of your best is. And when you look at it neutrally, and you're not trying to make your best based on your domestication, based on what somebody else thinks your best, but you create a best version of yourself based on your own personal values that you choose, on emotions that you want to have, on experiences that you want to have in your life. You're playing a whole other ball game. This is an incredibly different ball game than you've ever played. This is not the game that most people play. So in Men's Breakthrough, what we do is we create these things called quadrants, right? There are 4 or 5 quadrants, and it's where you want to live your life in. And when you live your life in these quadrants, what we find is that the next step to do, you say, I pick my quadrant. So let's say one of my quadrants is family. One of them is my mortgage business. Another one is my coaching business and my book, right? Another one is my friends. And maybe another one is Spartan racing, right? So when you have those quadrants, you know what to focus on. You know what to bring impeccability to, right? You know what to bring your impeccability to. You know where you don't take things personal. It creates a foundation and something really solid, and you're no longer making assumptions because you're moving towards something that's important to you. So that's the idea, and the whole idea of trying your best. Always be your best. So that's kind of how that works. And really the 4 agreements for me has been a powerful step into freedom. I work on them. I don't always remember them as far as exactly what they are, but they are really ingrained as something. They're really ingrained in me, and I'm always practicing them. And so one of the things that we do in coaching is we start to focus on that. And the reason we do that is because it all starts with your word, keeping your word. See, the whole thing about the 4 agreements, when you talk about be impeccable with your word and how they all follow, is what are you going to give your word to? Well, first off, actually, can you keep your word, right? Can you keep your word? Can you say you're going to do something and do it, okay? That's the first thing. That's cool. So then if you can do that, then life's going to be much, much better. But if what you want to do is accomplish something, you want to accomplish something big, then what you need to do is you need to build the muscle of giving your word, see? Because I know I can keep my word, but am I willing to give my word to something that's bigger than me? Am I willing to give my word to somewhere where I might sin? I might miss the mark. But I'm not giving my word as though I am giving myself permission to miss the mark. I'm saying I might miss the mark. And that's the power of coaching. That's where I find the power of your word. It's not in keeping your word where you already keep your word. It's giving your word in a place, in an area where you might not. But it's going to take everything inside of you to do that. So thank you very much for letting me share the first book, which is The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. I highly suggest you download it, you listen to it, you read it. It'll be a game changer. And if you're in my coaching program, it's something we'll talk about. So thank you very much. And if you want any information, know how to work with me, find out how to jump on a call with me, I'll put all the information in the notes here. And we'll see you next week with another book. Cheers.